A young girl's desperate cries echoed across the crowded country club as she accused her stepmom of pushing her into the swimming pool. The accusation hung in the air, creating a tense silence that was broken only when a millionaire suddenly dove into the water without hesitation. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The annual Marigold Foundation Garden Brunch was in full swing at Savannah's most exclusive country club. Crisp, white linen tablecloths fluttered in the gentle Georgia breeze as crystal glasses clinked amid the carefully modulated laughter of the city's elite. The private pool deck, bordered by manicured azaleas in full bloom, served as the perfect backdrop for the social event of the season. Camilla Langford moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her designer dress catching the midday sun as she accepted compliments on her recent charity work. Her stepdaughter, Isabel, stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, her small fingers nervously tracing patterns on her sundress. The child's eyes darted between the adults, watchful and wary. "And now, for the ceremonial toast to our generous donors," announced Mrs. Devon, the country club president, raising her glass with a practiced smile. The assembled guests turned toward the podium, their attention momentarily diverted from their careful social calculations. That's when it happened. A splash, followed by the most blood-curdling scream imaginable. "She pushed me! Stepmom pushed me!" Isabel's voice, rarely heard in these gatherings, cut through the genteel atmosphere like a knife. The child clung desperately to the pool's edge, her dress billowing around her in the water, her face a mask of terror as she pointed directly at Camilla. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Camilla's smile faltered only for a moment before reasserting itself. "Darling, you slipped," she said smoothly, dabbing at water spots on her skirt. "Everyone saw you playing too close to the edge." The assembled guests shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances but saying nothing. The unspoken code of Savannah's high society hung heavy in the air. Family matters remained private, regardless of what one might witness. From the back of the crowd, a tall figure moved with sudden purpose. Julian Worthing, whose family fortune and enigmatic personality made him both sought after and slightly feared in social circles, strode directly to the pool's edge. Without hesitation, the millionaire dove into the water, expensive blue suit and all. In 3 powerful strokes, Julian reached Isabel, lifting her small, trembling form against his chest. Water cascaded from his dark hair as he climbed out, cradling the child protectively. "Julian! Really?" Camilla laughed nervously, extending her arms. "Such dramatics. Hand her over. She's just having one of her episodes." Julian's eyes narrowed as he wrapped his soaked jacket around Isabel's shoulders. "She's coming with me," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering. The declaration hung in the air like a thunderclap. In that moment, every witness knew that Julian Worthing had just committed the cardinal sin of Southern society. He had made a private matter public, challenging not just Camilla Langford, but the very foundations of their carefully constructed social order. Julian Worthing wrapped his tailored jacket around Isabel's trembling shoulders, water dripping from his soaked blue suit onto the immaculate tiles of the country club deck. The little girl clutched the fabric tightly, her eyes downcast, but occasionally darting toward her stepmother with unmistakable fear. Julian's unexpected intervention had shattered the carefully maintained veneer of the Marigold Foundation's annual garden brunch like a stone through glass. "It was just an accident," Camilla Langford announced, her voice carrying across the pool area with practiced charm. "Poor Isabel simply lost her balance. Children can be so clumsy." She dabbed at her designer skirt with a napkin, her smile fixed but her eyes cold as they locked onto the child. "Come along now, darling. Let's get you dried off." The whispers had already begun among the linen-clad socialites. Savannah's elite exchanged meaningful glances over champagne flutes, their southern politeness barely containing their hunger for scandal. Mrs. Devon, her pearl necklace gleaming in the afternoon sun, glided across the deck with the authority that came with her position as country club president. "Perhaps we should all return to our tables," she suggested, her voice honey-sweet but brooking no argument. "I'm sure this little misunderstanding can be resolved privately." Julian stood his ground, one hand protectively on Isabel's shoulder. "This isn't a misunderstanding," he stated firmly, "and it won't be handled privately. I'm taking her to the hospital." Camilla's composure slipped momentarily. "That's completely unnecessary. I'm her stepmother, which is exactly why I'm concerned," Julian interrupted, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. "Isabel specifically said you pushed her." The socialite's face hardened. "She's confused." "Upset," Children say all sorts of things when they're frightened. Julian guided Isabel toward the exit, ignoring the stares and murmurs that followed them. In his vehicle, the child remained silent, her small hands still gripping his jacket like a lifeline. At the hospital, a gentle-voiced doctor examined Isabel, noting with concern the pattern of bruises on her arms and back, marks inconsistent with a simple fall. "These are in various stages of healing," the physician explained quietly to Julian in the hallway. "Some are quite old." That evening, after ensuring Isabel was comfortable in a private room with a kind nurse watching over her, Julian made a call to his attorney. The decision crystallized. With absolute clarity, he would file for emergency guardianship first thing in the morning. Whatever storm would follow, he was prepared to weather it. The millionaire had jumped into more than just a swimming pool that day. He had plunged headlong into a battle that would upend Savannah's social hierarchy and change multiple lives forever. The Savannah Chronicle's front page blared the headline that sent shockwaves through the city's oak-lined streets. Tech millionaire seeks emergency. Guardianship of Langford heiress. Julian Worthing's legal filing had bypassed the usual channels of Southern discretion, landing directly in Judge Harriman's chambers and the public eye simultaneously. Inside Savannah Memorial Hospital, Isabel sat quietly in her private room, small fingers tracing patterns on her blanket. The attending physician had documented 3 distinct bruise patterns inconsistent with a simple fall, evidence that Julian's legal team had already submitted to the court. The child hadn't spoken much since the incident, but her eyes followed Julian whenever he entered the room, a silent acknowledgement of trust. Camilla Langford wasted no time mobilizing her considerable resources. By afternoon, she had assembled a crisis management team at the Langford estate. "This is character assassination," she declared to her publicist, dabbing at perfectly applied makeup. "Julian is clearly unstable. First he makes a scene at our most prestigious charity event, then kidnaps my stepdaughter." The socialite's voice cracked with practiced emotion as she instructed her team to emphasize Julian's outsider status and questionable business practices. By evening, Camilla's narrative dominated local television. 3 society matrons, all board members alongside Mrs. Devon, appeared on Channel 8 expressing concern about that northern businessman and his inappropriate attachment to Isabel. The Savannah elite closed ranks around one of their own, phone trees activating across the historic district. Meanwhile, in her office overlooking Forsyth Park, Dr. Sasha Reynolds watched the news with growing concern. She hadn't spoken to Julian since their engagement ended 2 years prior, but the footage of him diving into that pool, the determination on his face, reminded her of the man she'd once loved. As a child psychologist with hospital privileges, she knew she could help. After hesitating over her phone for nearly an hour, she finally texted him. "I saw the news. Isabel might need specialized support. I can help, professionally." Julian's reply came instantly. "Please." The next morning, as Camilla posed for sympathetic photographers outside her attorney's office, Julian sat in a hospital conference room with Sasha. The psychologist reviewed Isabel's medical charts, her expression darkening. "These patterns suggest ongoing trauma, not a single incident," she explained, her professional demeanor masking the turmoil of being near Julian. "Again, the court will need expert testimony about her psychological state." Julian nodded, exhaustion evident in his posture. "I can't explain it, Dr. Reynolds. When I saw her in that pool, pointing at Camilla, I just knew." Sasha's clinical reserve softened momentarily. "Some things don't need explanation. Let's focus on helping Isabel find her voice. The truth has a way of surfacing, even in Savannah." While the adults were busy with damage control, 16-year-old Noel Parker had captured everything on his drone. The tech-savvy influencer had been testing his new device above the Marigold Foundation brunch when his lens caught the unthinkable. Isabel's terrified face as she fell into the water, her small finger pointing directly at Camilla Langford, and Julian Worthing's immediate plunge into the pool. "This is insane," Noel whispered, reviewing the footage in his bedroom later that evening. With a few taps on his smartphone, he uploaded the video to his social media accounts. By morning, the clip had amassed over 200,000 views. The footage spread through Savannah like wildfire. Frame by frame, viewers could see Camilla's hand clearly making contact with Isabel's back before the child tumbled into the water. The socialite's practiced smile faltered for just a moment, a microsecond of truth caught in high definition. Then came Julian's reaction, immediate, instinctive, protective. "I always knew something was off about that woman," commented one viewer. "The way she treats that poor child when she thinks no one's watching." Camilla's carefully curated image began crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. Her phone rang incessantly with calls from friends suddenly concerned about their association with her. The country club members who had once fawned over her designer outfits now exchanged whispers behind her back. Mrs. Devon found herself in an impossible position. As president of the club, she had initially defended Camilla, dismissing the incident as a misunderstanding. Now, with the video evidence circulating, her loyalty wavered. "I've known Camilla for years," she confided to her husband over breakfast. "But that video? I can't ignore what I saw with my own eyes." The viral footage transformed the custody battle overnight. What had begun as a private legal matter became a public referendum on privilege, accountability, and the protection of children. News outlets picked up the story, interviewing child welfare experts and former acquaintances of the Langford family. Julian's legal team seized the opportunity, submitting the video as evidence in their emergency guardianship petition. "The court of public opinion has already rendered its verdict," his attorney told him. "Now we need the actual court to do the same." Sasha watched the video 17 times, her professional training allowing her to catalog every micro-expression on Isabel's face. The fear wasn't new, she realized. It was familiar, the reaction of a child who had experienced this before. Meanwhile, Isabel remained silent in Julian's guest house, unaware that her moment of terror had become a catalyst for change. The truth she had tried to tell for so long was finally being heard, not through her words but through Noel's drone, hovering above the Savannah elite like the conscience they had collectively ignored. The moonlight spilled through the guest house windows as Julian Worthing checked on Isabel for the third time that night. The child had barely spoken since he'd brought her to his Savannah estate, her small fingers perpetually clutching a worn notebook filled with drawings that seemed more like codes than art. She'd eat when prompted, nod when asked direct questions, but otherwise remained in her protective shell. "You're safe here," Julian would tell her each night, though he wondered if any child could feel truly safe after what she'd endured. On the fifth night, while Isabel was taking a bath supervised by the housekeeper, Julian noticed the corner of her mattress slightly askew. Something compelled him to lift it, revealing a collection of carefully folded papers tucked beneath. Letters, dozens of them, written in a steady, masculine hand. "My dearest Belle," each one began, signed simply, "Daddy." Julian's hands trembled as he unfolded one dated just 3 months ago. Thomas Langford was supposedly missing for over a year, according to Camilla's dramatic accounts to the Savannah elite. Yet here was evidence not only of his communication, but of his deep love for his daughter. "Remember our special places," one letter read. "The lighthouse, the old oak, the secret garden. When you see the blue heron, think of me watching over you." Other notes contained what appeared to be simple father-daughter exchanges, but Julian noticed patterns, references to dates, locations, and symbols that matched those in Isabel's drawings. Some contained warnings, "Be careful what you tell her," and "Remember our code if you need help." When Isabel returned to her room, she froze in the doorway, eyes wide at the sight of Julian with the letters. "She said Daddy never wrote to me," the child whispered, her voice so faint Julian had to lean forward to hear. "She said he forgot about me." "He didn't forget," Julian replied gently. "He's been trying to reach you." Tears welled in Isabel's eyes as she approached, taking the letters from Julian's hands and pressing them to her chest. "She'll be mad if she knows I kept them." "Camilla won't know," Julian promised, "and she can't hurt you anymore." That night, Isabel spoke more than she had in days, explaining how her father would secretly slip letters under her pillow during his brief visits Camilla had told everyone never happened. As Julian tucked her in, his mind raced with implications. Thomas hadn't abandoned his daughter. He was communicating through a secret code. The custody situation, Thomas's disappearance, Camilla's behavior, everything needed re-examination. Whatever had driven Thomas Langford away, Julian was now certain of one thing. The man had never stopped being a father, and somewhere out there, he was waiting to return. Julian Worthing sat in his study staring at the manila folder that had just arrived by courier. The contents had shaken him to his core. After hiring a private investigator to dig into Camilla Langford's background, he'd discovered something that turned his personal mission into a haunting echo of his past. "It can't be a coincidence," he whispered, tracing his finger over the yellowed newspaper clipping. The article detailed a child welfare case from 20 years ago involving Camilla's aunt, Eleanor Prescott. The same Eleanor Prescott who had been a foster parent to Julian's sister Amelia before her death from complications of pneumonia at age 9. The investigator had uncovered a pattern. 3 children under Eleanor's care had been hospitalized with suspicious injuries. Each time, the Prescott family's connections had ensured the cases were quietly closed. Amelia had been the 4th and final child in her care, the one who never made it out. Julian poured himself a drink with trembling hands. He'd been just 14 when Amelia died, powerless to help her despite her desperate letters describing accidents and punishments. Now, looking at Isabel's medical records alongside the old case files, he saw the same patterns emerging. Unexplained bruises dismissed as childhood clumsiness. Emotional withdrawal labeled as shyness. The apple doesn't fall far from the family tree, he muttered, thinking of how Camilla had learned from her aunt's example. Both women had married into prominent families. Both had cultivated impeccable social images, and both had hidden their cruelty behind Savannah's code of polite silence. The next morning, Julian met with Sasha at a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. The child psychologist listened intently as he shared his discoveries. "This isn't just about Isabel anymore," he explained, his voice tight with emotion. "There's a generational pattern here. The Prescott women, Camilla, her aunt, they're protected by Savannah's social structure. People like Mrs. Devon look the other way because acknowledging the truth would mean dismantling their entire world." Sasha reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "This explains your intensity from the beginning. This isn't just about saving one child. It's about the one you couldn't save." Julian nodded, swallowing hard. "I was too young, too powerless to help Amelia. But I'm not powerless anymore." That evening, as Julian watched Isabel sketching quietly in the garden of his estate, he made a silent promise. This time would be different. He would not only protect this child, but expose the elegant facade that had allowed such abuse to continue unchecked for generations. Savannah's genteel traditions of discretion and deference had created the perfect cover for predators in pearls and seersucker. For Isabel, for Amelia, he would tear it all down if necessary. Sasha Bennett watched intently as Isabel's colored pencil moved across the page with unusual precision. What had begun as abstract swirls and chaotic lines in their first therapy sessions had evolved into something far more structured. The child's artwork now contained recurring symbols, a particular spiral pattern, a distinctive cross-hatching, and what appeared to be a stylized bird in flight. "These are beautiful, Isabel," Sasha said, carefully arranging the drawings in sequence. "They tell a story, don't they?" The girl nodded but remained silent, her eyes fixed on her latest creation. 3 weeks into their sessions, Isabel had begun to open up through art when words failed her. Each drawing seemed more deliberate than the last. Meanwhile, Julian had been exploring the Langford estate, searching for anything that might help Isabel's case. In the library, behind a row of leather-bound classics, he discovered a collection of Thomas's travel journals. The notebooks were filled with detailed observations, sketches, and what appeared to be a personal code system. When Julian brought the journals to Sasha's office during Isabel's next session, the psychologist's eyes widened in recognition. "Look at this," she whispered, placing one of Isabel's drawings beside an open page from Thomas's journal. The symbols matched perfectly, the same spiral, the same cross-hatching, the identical bird motif. "How is this possible?" Julian asked, his voice hushed with amazement. Isabel looked up, her expression brightening slightly. "Daddy taught me," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's our secret language." Sasha gently placed her hand on the child's shoulder. "Isabel, do you remember everything your father showed you?" The girl nodded. "I see it in my head. Like pictures that stay." "Photographic memory," Sasha explained to Julian. "It's rare, but some children have the ability to recall images with extraordinary detail." Julian leafed through the journal pages, then back to Isabel's drawings. "This isn't just art therapy," he realized. "She's been trying to tell us something all along." That evening, as they carefully examined each symbol and its potential meaning, Sasha made notes for the upcoming court hearing. "This changes everything," she told Julian. "Her memory and these matching symbols give her testimony a credibility that Camilla can't easily dismiss." Isabel, watching them from across the room, added another symbol to her newest drawing, a small key beside a door. The adults didn't notice, but for the first time since the incident at the pool, a hint of hope flickered in the child's eyes. Julian Worthing adjusted his tie nervously as he stood at the entrance of the Langford estate. He had called ahead with the excuse of collecting more of Isabel's belongings: clothes, books, anything that might make the child feel more at home in his guest house. Camilla had reluctantly agreed, though she insisted on having her housekeeper supervise his visit. "Mr. Worthing, please follow me," the housekeeper whispered, leading him upstairs. "Miss Isabel's room is this way. Mrs. Langford is out at her charity meeting." The millionaire nodded, noting how the woman glanced anxiously over her shoulder. Isabel's bedroom was exactly as a child's should be, colorful, filled with books and stuffed animals, yet it felt staged, as if no one actually lived there. While gathering Isabel's favorite books, Julian noticed a loose floorboard beneath the window seat. Curiosity piqued, he carefully lifted it, revealing a leather-bound album tucked away in the darkness. "Sir, you shouldn't," the housekeeper began, then fell silent, wringing her hands. "Did you know about this?" Julian asked gently. She nodded. "Mr. Thomas made that album. He and Miss Isabel would look at it together when—" She trailed off, eyes darting toward the hallway. Julian opened the album, his heart tightening. Page after page showed Thomas and Isabel laughing, painting, reading together, moments of genuine joy captured in time. There were birthday celebrations, beach trips, and quiet evenings in the library. In every photo, the bond between father and daughter was undeniable. Then came the shock. The final page had been violently torn out, leaving jagged paper edges in a single corner of what appeared to be a family photo. "The last picture," the housekeeper whispered. "It was taken 3 days before Mr. Thomas disappeared." They were all at the lake house. Miss Isabel had caught her first fish. Julian's fingers traced the torn edge. And Camilla removed it. Why? "Mrs. Langford said all photos of Mr. Thomas were too upsetting for the child," she replied, though her tone suggested disbelief. As Julian carefully replaced the album in its hiding place, he understood its significance. This wasn't just a collection of memories. It was evidence. Evidence of a loving relationship between Thomas and his daughter. Evidence that contradicted Camilla's narrative of an uninvolved father. The missing page represented something Camilla couldn't allow to exist. Proof of a family dynamic that threatened her carefully constructed story. What was in that final image that needed to be erased so desperately? Julian slipped his phone from his pocket and quickly photographed several pages before returning the album to its hiding place. These weren't just pictures. They were pieces of Isabel's history, and perhaps clues to Thomas's disappearance. Julian was organizing Isabel's belongings in the guest house when a soft knock interrupted him. At the door stood Eliza, the elderly housekeeper who had worked at the Langford estate for over 20 years. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she glanced over her shoulder. "Mr. Worthing," she whispered, "I've been waiting for the right moment." From her apron pocket, Eliza produced a small flash drive. "Mr. Thomas trusted me. Before he disappeared, he gave me this and made me promise to keep it safe until someone came for Isabel." Julian accepted the drive, feeling its weight beyond its physical presence. "Why now?" "I saw what happened at the brunch. The way you jumped in for that child." Tears welled in her eyes. Mr. Thomas would have done the same. After Eliza departed, Julian inserted the drive into his laptop. A single audio file appeared, a voicemail from Thomas Langford, dated 3 days before his disappearance. "If you're hearing this," Thomas's voice began, strained but determined, "then someone has finally questioned Camilla's story. I can't say much. They're watching. The Meridian acquisition documents in my study. The numbers don't add up. Isabel knows more than she realizes. Her drawings aren't just art. They're her way of processing what she's seen. Keep her safe. The blue boat points north. Remember our fishing trip to Argentina? Start there." Julian replayed the message 4 times, his heart pounding harder with each listen. Thomas hadn't abandoned his daughter. He'd been running from something, perhaps even to protect her. At 3 a.m, Julian called Sasha. The child psychologist answered groggily but became instantly alert when he explained the situation. "Isabel's drawings," she said. "The blue boat appears in almost everyone. I thought it was just a comfort object, but what if it's more?" Julian pulled out the notebook where he'd been documenting Isabel's progress. Thomas mentioned Argentina. In her session last week, she drew mountains with a specific pattern I couldn't place. "The Andes," Sasha realized. "Julian, I think Thomas left a trail only his daughter could fully understand." The millionaire stared at the flash drive, a small portal to an expanding mystery. What had begun as a rescue from a pool was evolving into something far more complex. Thomas's disappearance wasn't abandonment, it was strategic, and finding him might be the key to ensuring Isabel's safety permanently. Tomorrow, Julian decided, we start looking at those drawings differently. Thomas isn't just missing. He's waiting to be found. The Savannah courthouse buzzed with tension as Camilla Langford's legal team launched their attack. Her lead attorney, a silver-haired man with deep roots in Georgia's legal establishment, painted Julian Worthing as a dangerous outsider. Mr. Worthing may have wealth, Your Honor, but he lacks understanding of our traditions and values, the lawyer argued, his accent thickening for effect. This man has no familial connection to young Isabel, and no business interfering in matters of Southern family. Julian sat straight-backed, his jaw clenched as the character assassination continued. His attorney objected repeatedly to the irrelevant appeals to regional loyalty, but the strategy was clear. Frame the millionaire as an interloper disrupting the natural order. Across town, Sasha conducted her fourth therapy session with Isabel in a warm, sunlit room filled with art supplies. The child psychologist had made significant progress gaining the girl's trust, using drawing exercises to help her express what words couldn't yet convey. "Can you tell me about this picture?" Sasha asked gently, pointing to a dark scribble Isabel had labeled "The Bad Game." Isabel's small fingers twisted in her lap. "It's when I had to stay in the closet," she whispered. "If I made noise, I wouldn't get dinner." Sasha maintained her professional composure despite the chill that ran through her. "How often did you play this game?" "When Daddy was away on business trips," Isabel replied, her voice strengthening slightly. "And there were other games, too." Over the next hour, the child revealed a pattern of games that explained her withdrawn behavior and the mysterious bruises documented at the hospital. Sasha carefully recorded everything, recognizing the therapeutic breakthrough for what it was, evidence. The following day, Sasha testified in court, presenting Isabel's accounts with clinical precision. The judge, a mother herself, leaned forward as the psychologist explained how the child's descriptions matched perfectly with medical records and behavioral assessments. "In my professional opinion," Sasha concluded, "these are not fabrications. The consistency across multiple sessions, the specific details only a child who experienced these events would know. These indicate truthful disclosure." When Isabel herself spoke briefly from a private chamber, her voice, small but clear through the court's video system, even Camilla's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Judge Eleanor Harmon removed her glasses, fixing Camilla with a penetrating stare. "Given the testimony we've heard today, I am ordering a comprehensive investigation into Mrs. Langford's history and background." She turned toward Julian's attorney. "The temporary guardianship will remain in place pending these findings." As the gavel fell, Julian exhaled slowly. Across the courtroom, Camilla's perfectly composed facade cracked just enough to reveal the panic beneath. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the truth had found its voice. Julian Worthing's search for answers led him to the cramped office of Martha Grisham, a retired court clerk with salt and pepper hair and a permanent scowl. Her 35 years in Savannah's legal system had left her with both encyclopedic knowledge and deep-seated resentments. "I remember Camilla Langford all too well," Martha said, her voice dropping to a whisper despite them being alone. "That woman swept into town 15 years ago with her first husband, charmed everyone at the country club, then showed her true colors. Behind closed doors." Julian leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Martha unlocked a filing cabinet and extracted a worn manila folder. "This was supposed to be destroyed during the system migration. I kept it because something felt wrong about how quickly it disappeared." She slid the file across her desk. "Camilla was investigated for child neglect with her first husband's son. The boy was 7. Bruises, unexplained injuries, psychological withdrawal. Sound familiar?" Julian's hands trembled as he opened the file. Photographs of a small boy with hollow eyes stared back at him. Medical reports documented injuries inconsistent with normal childhood accidents. Witness statements described a charming stepmother who transformed when cameras weren't present. "What happened to the case?" Julian asked, his throat tight. "Dismissed. Her husband suddenly withdrew all complaints. The boy recanted his story, and the family moved to Charleston shortly after. The husband died in a boating accident 2 years later." Martha's eyes narrowed. "The boy went to live with his maternal grandparents." Camilla walked away with a substantial inheritance. Julian carefully photographed each document with his smartphone. "This pattern, it's identical to what Isabel is experiencing." "That's why I kept it," Martha nodded. Some people don't change, they just find new victims. By evening, Julian's legal team had authenticated the documents and filed them as evidence. The unsealed file created a seismic shift in the case, establishing a pattern of behavior that could no longer be dismissed as misunderstanding or coincidence. At the Marigold Foundation's emergency board meeting, Mrs. Devon sat silently as members debated their response. When finally asked for her opinion, she removed her reading glasses and sighed. "I've known Camilla for 8 years," she said carefully. "But I've known the truth about people like her my entire life. This club, this community, cannot continue protecting those who harm children, regardless of their social standing." The next morning, Julian received a discreet call from Mrs. Devon herself. "The foundation will be withdrawing its support for Camilla's custody claim," she said simply, "and I've spoken with several other prominent families who will do the same." As Julian hung up, he looked at the photograph of Isabel on his desk. For the first time since the pool incident, he felt the tide truly turning in their favor. "Would you like to enter the poetry contest?" Sasha asked one afternoon, showing Isabel a colorful flyer for the Savannah Youth Literary Festival. The child looked up from her notebook, her eyes widening with a mixture of interest and apprehension. Julian Worthing, who had been reviewing legal documents nearby, set his papers aside. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he encouraged, his voice gentle. "Your writing is beautiful, Isabel." For 3 weeks, Isabel worked on her poem in the guest house at Julian's estate. She would sit by the window, scribbling in her worn notebook, occasionally crossing out lines and starting again. Sasha visited regularly, offering guidance without imposing her own ideas. The psychologist knew this creative outlet could be therapeutic, giving Isabel control over her narrative for the first time. On the day of the contest, the community center buzzed with excitement. Parents clutched programs while children in their best clothes fidgeted nervously backstage. Julian straightened Isabel's blue dress collar and squeezed her hand. "Remember, just being here is already brave." When her turn came, Isabel approached the microphone. The audience fell silent. Her voice, barely audible at first, grew stronger with each line of "The Girl Who Didn't Drown." She spoke of dark water, of hands that should protect but instead push down, and finally of breaking the surface to breathe again. "And though they said I slipped and fell, the truth lived in my bones. Some secrets are too heavy to keep. Some voices won't stay drowned." By the final stanza, several audience members were wiping away tears. The judges exchanged meaningful glances. Even Mrs. Devon, seated near the back, appeared visibly moved, her earlier allegiance to Camilla Langford clearly wavering. When the winners were announced, Isabel's name echoed through the hall for first place in her age category. The applause was thunderous. Julian lifted her onto his shoulders as photographers captured the moment for the local newspaper. "You found your voice," Sasha whispered as she hugged the child afterward. And everyone heard it. The victory rippled through Savannah's tight-knit community. People who had previously viewed Isabel as merely a tragic figure in an elite family scandal now recognized her as a person with depth, talent, and courage. Several parents approached Julian after the ceremony, offering playdates and friendship for Isabel. That night, as Julian tucked her into bed, Isabel smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed her face. "They believed me," she said simply. "Yes," Julian replied, his throat tight with emotion. "And more importantly, you believed yourself." He placed her trophy on the nightstand, where it caught the soft lamplight. For the first time since the incident at the pool, Isabel fell asleep without fear, her notebook open beside her, already filling with words for her next poem. Camilla Langford arranged what she called a reconciliation tea at the Langford estate, strategically inviting reporters from every local news outlet in Savannah. The grand parlor gleamed with polished silver and fresh-cut flowers, a calculated display of Southern hospitality and maternal concern. "I just want my family whole again," she told the Savannah Morning News, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. The socialite had dressed Isabel in a frilly pink dress that made the child look younger than her years. Cameras flashed as Camilla guided her stepdaughter to a seat beside her on the antique settee, her manicured hand gripping the girl's shoulder with practiced tenderness. "Isabel and I have always been close," she announced to the assembled press. "This unfortunate misunderstanding has been blown out of proportion by certain parties with their own agendas." Her smile remained fixed as television cameras captured her every word. The child sat rigid, eyes downcast, fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. When a reporter asked Isabel if she was happy to be reunited with her stepmother, the room fell silent. The girl looked up, her gaze darting between the cameras and Camilla's warning glare. "I want to go home," Isabel whispered, her voice barely audible. "To Julian's house." "Please." Camilla's smile faltered for just a moment before she laughed lightly. "Children say the silliest things when they're overwhelmed. Perhaps we've had enough questions for today." But Isabel suddenly stood, backing away from the settee. "You hurt me," she said, her voice growing stronger. "You always hurt me. I don't want to be here." The room erupted in chaos as Camilla lunged for the child, knocking over a teacup that spilled across the pristine tablecloth. "She's confused," Camilla insisted, her composure cracking. "She needs her medication." What none of the traditional media had noticed was Noel, positioned discreetly in the corner, capturing everything on his smartphone. The teen influencer's live stream reached thousands of viewers in real time, his commentary cutting through Camilla's performance. "This is what abuse looks like, when it wears pearls and serves tea," he narrated as security escorted Isabel from the room. By evening, clips of Isabel's panic and Camilla's desperate attempts to control the narrative dominated social media. Mrs. Devon, watching from her home, finally made her decision. She picked up her phone and called Julian Worthing. "I believe that child," she said simply, "and I think it's time Savannah stopped protecting people like Camilla." The carefully orchestrated tea party, meant to salvage Camilla's reputation, had instead become the final nail in its coffin. Julian Worthing spread Isabel's drawings across the polished mahogany table in his study. The evening light cast long shadows over the colorful sketches as Sasha leaned in beside him, her trained eye catching patterns the others had missed. "These aren't just therapeutic expressions," Sasha whispered, tracing her finger along a series of blue spirals that appeared in multiple drawings. "Look at how deliberate these markings are." Julian nodded, reaching for Thomas's leather-bound travel journal he'd recovered from the Langford estate. Flipping through the worn pages, he stopped suddenly, his breath catching. The symbols match. Exactly. The connection was undeniable. What everyone had dismissed as a child's artistic outlet was actually a sophisticated code. Isabel's photographic memory had captured and reproduced her father's notations with remarkable precision. Blue spirals for coastal locations, triangular mountains for meeting points, and tiny stars marking dates. "Thomas wasn't just writing travel notes," Julian said, excitement building in his voice. He was creating a map only Isabel could follow. Sasha carefully arranged the drawings in chronological order, revealing a pattern that had been invisible when viewed separately. He knew she would remember. He trusted her mind. The following morning, Julian visited the police station, where Officer Martinez pulled Thomas's missing persons file. The revelation struck like lightning. Thomas had never officially reported himself missing. There was no formal investigation, only assumptions and Camilla's carefully managed narrative. He didn't vanish, Julian realized. He escaped. Back at the guest house, Isabel sat cross-legged on the carpet, adding details to a new drawing. When Julian gently asked about the recurring symbols, she didn't look up. "Daddy showed me his special writing," she said simply. "He said if I ever needed to find him, I should draw what I remember." Julian exchanged a glance with Sasha, whose eyes glistened with understanding. Thomas had created an escape route and left breadcrumbs only his daughter could interpret, a testament to his faith in her abilities and a safeguard against Camilla's interference. That evening, Julian carefully traced one of Isabel's drawings onto transparent paper and overlaid it on a map. The correlation was unmistakable. Coordinates to locations across 3 continents, with dates marked by tiny stars. "He's been moving," Julian whispered to Sasha as Isabel slept nearby. "These aren't random hideouts, they're deliberate stops." Sasha nodded, her professional demeanor momentarily giving way to wonder. He knew someone would eventually understand. He was counting on it. As they worked through the night, the puzzle pieces of Thomas's disappearance began falling into place. This wasn't a man who abandoned his daughter. This was a father who had orchestrated his own vanishing act, leaving a trail that only the most observant and loving eyes could follow. Julian's phone chimed at 3 a.m. Bleary-eyed, he reached for it, expecting another threatening message from Camilla Langford's lawyers. Instead, an anonymous email glowed on the screen, containing only geographic coordinates and a cryptic message: "The hummingbird flies south when winter comes." The coordinates pointed to a small coastal town in Argentina. Julian Worthing sat bolt upright, his mind racing. The phrase matched a line from Thomas's travel journal: the same journal where Isabel had traced her finger over hand-drawn maps with peculiar symbols. Those identical symbols had appeared in her recent artwork, particularly in a drawing she'd titled Daddy's Safe Place. "It can't be coincidence," he whispered to himself, pulling up the digital scans of both the journal and Isabel's drawings on his device. Side by side, the patterns were unmistakable. The child hadn't been randomly doodling. She'd been recreating her father's secret code from memory. By morning, Julian had connected with a private investigator specializing in international cases. Thomas wasn't running from family responsibilities, Julian explained during their video call. He was hiding from corporate retaliation. Documents buried in Thomas's journals pointed to his discovery of toxic waste dumping by his employer, a multinational with powerful connections to Savannah's elite families, including Camilla's. He'd gathered evidence, prepared to become a whistleblower, but disappeared before going public. He didn't abandon Isabel, Julian realized. He was protecting her by staying away. Meanwhile, Noel's viral video had reached beyond American shores. The footage of Isabel's accusation at the pool, Camilla's panicked reaction, and Julian's dramatic rescue had been subtitled in multiple languages, including Spanish. In a small internet cafe overlooking the Argentine coast, Thomas stared at his screen in horror. His daughter's terrified face, her small body struggling at the pool's edge, and the words captioned beneath, "She pushed me." His hands trembled as he watched the tall millionaire dive in, pulling Isabel to safety. After months of silence, Thomas finally reached out. A postcard arrived at Julian's home, bearing only a hummingbird stamp and 7 words, "Coming home. Keep her safe until then." Sasha, visiting to check on Isabel's progress, noticed the postcard on Julian's desk. "Is this what I think it is?" she asked, her professional composure momentarily slipping. Julian nodded. "He's alive. And he's coming back to face everything, the corporate criminals, the legal system, and the daughter he left behind." "How will you tell her?" Sasha asked, glancing toward the garden where Isabel sat sketching, unaware that her coded messages had finally reached their destination. "I think," Julian said quietly, "she already knows." The courthouse buzzed with tension as Julian Worthing's attorney stood before Judge Holloway, clutching a manila folder that would change everything. The legal team had worked through the night after discovering documents buried in county records that no one had bothered to verify. "Your Honor," the attorney began, "we've uncovered evidence that fundamentally invalidates Ms. Langford's custody claim over Isabel." The courtroom fell silent as she revealed the bombshell. Camilla and Thomas had never legally married. The ceremony in Barbados 5 years ago had been performed without proper documentation, and Camilla had deliberately avoided formalizing it upon return to the United States. Camilla's face drained of color. The socialite gripped the edge of the table, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the polished wood. Her attorney whispered frantically in her ear, but she seemed frozen in place. "Furthermore," Julian's lawyer continued, "the custody papers giving Ms. Langford guardianship over Isabel contained forged signatures and were never properly notarized." She presented affidavits from the supposed notary, who confirmed never handling such documents. Judge Holloway removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Ms. Langford, these are serious allegations. Do you have any response?" Camilla stood shakily, her designer suit suddenly seeming too large for her frame. "It was a misunderstanding," she stammered. "Thomas and I always intended to finalize everything." From his seat, Julian watched her crumble, feeling not triumph, but a profound sadness for Isabel. The child had been living under the authority of someone who had fabricated her very right to guardianship. The judge ordered an immediate review of all custody arrangements and initiated proceedings to terminate Camilla's rights. As word spread through the courthouse, Mrs. Devon slipped out quietly, avoiding reporters' questions. The president of the country club, once Camilla's staunch defender, couldn't bear to witness her fall from grace. Outside, Sasha waited with Isabel, sheltering the girl from the media circus. The psychologist had prepared her for the possibility of major changes, but some truths were still too heavy for a child's shoulders. That evening, as rain pattered against the windows of Julian's estate, he sat with Isabel, carefully explaining what had happened in terms she could understand. "Does this mean I don't have to go back?" she asked, her small voice barely audible. "Yes," Julian answered gently. "The judge says you can stay here while we wait for your dad." For the first time since the incident at the pool, Isabel smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. In that moment, as thunder rolled across Savannah's skyline, the foundations of the city's social order trembled. But within the walls of Julian's home, truth had finally created something stable. The forensic accountants hired by Julian Worthing had been working tirelessly for days. When they finally presented their findings, the evidence was damning. Camilla Langford had systematically drained over $200,000 from Isabel's inheritance trust, money Thomas had set aside for his daughter's future. She used shell companies, explained the lead investigator, spreading documents across Julian's mahogany desk, each withdrawal disguised as educational expenses or medical care that never happened. Julian clenched his jaw, remembering Isabel's worn clothes and untreated ear infections. The socialite had been funding her designer wardrobe and country club memberships with money meant for the child's well-being. When confronted with the evidence during an emergency hearing, Camilla's carefully maintained facade cracked. The woman who had ruled Savannah's social scene with immaculate makeup and cutting remarks now looked small, her eyes darting toward the courtroom exits. Hours later, Mrs. Devon received an urgent call from her husband. Camilla was seen packing her luxury vehicle with suitcases, she whispered to Julian over the phone. She's running. The police were notified immediately, but Camilla had already abandoned her automobile at a private airfield. She had connections, wealthy friends with private jets and vacation homes in countries without extradition treaties. What she hadn't counted on was Noel. The teenager had become invested in Isabel's story, his initial viral video transforming him from mere influencer to crusading citizen journalist. When his followers spotted Camilla at Savannah International Airport, Noel launched his drone. She's at Terminal B, wearing a blonde wig and sunglasses, he reported, live streaming the footage to thousands of viewers. Ticket counter for international departures. The police arrived within minutes. Camilla's arrest played out under the unforgiving eye of Noel's drone camera, her designer sunglasses askew, her perfectly manicured hands cuffed behind her back as officers led her through the terminal. Sasha held Isabel close, shielding her from the footage that dominated every local news channel. She can't hurt you anymore, the psychologist assured her. The truth always finds its way to the surface. That evening, as Julian sat in his study reviewing the formal charges, embezzlement, fraud, child endangerment, and attempted flight to avoid prosecution, he received a text message from Mrs. Devon. The club board has voted unanimously to revoke her membership. Some things cannot be forgiven, even in Savannah. He smiled grimly. The woman who had built her life on appearances would now face the harshest punishment her world could deliver: complete social exile, alongside criminal prosecution. For Isabel's sake, justice had finally arrived, dressed in handcuffs rather than designer clothes. Thomas Langford stepped off the plane at Savannah International Airport, his face weathered from months in Argentina. The weight of his decisions, both to flee and to return, sat heavily on his shoulders as he scanned the terminal. When he spotted Julian and Isabel waiting, his composure crumbled. "Daddy!" Isabel broke free from Julian's gentle grip, racing across the polished floor. Thomas dropped to his knees, enveloping his daughter in a desperate embrace. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent he'd dreamed about during countless sleepless nights in hiding. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting you." Julian stood back, giving them space while maintaining a watchful eye. The businessman had grown fiercely protective of Isabel over these tumultuous months. He observed the reunion with mixed emotions: joy for Isabel, uncertainty about what Thomas's return meant for their arrangement. Later that evening, at Julian's estate, Thomas sat across from his daughter's guardian in the warmly lit study. "I can never repay what you've done," he said, turning the crystal tumbler in his hands. "When I left those coded messages in my journals, I never imagined Isabel would find someone like you to help decipher them." "She's remarkable," Julian replied. "Her memory, her resilience, she never stopped believing you'd return." Thomas nodded, swallowing hard. "While I was exposing corporate fraud in Argentina, I lived in constant fear that Camilla would discover what I'd done. I convinced myself Isabel would be safer if I disappeared completely." "You couldn't have known what Camilla was capable of," Julian offered, though his tone carried a hint of judgment. "No, but I should have." Thomas set down his glass. "I failed her." The two men fell silent, united by their shared concern for the child sleeping upstairs. Through the window, Savannah's ancient oaks swayed in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows across the lawn. "She needs stability now," Thomas finally said, "and she's formed a bond with you that I won't disrupt." He leaned forward, eyes earnest. "Would you consider sharing guardianship?" I know it's unconventional, but— Yes, Julian answered without hesitation. Isabel deserves to have her father in her life, and I've grown to care for her too much to walk away. Thomas extended his hand, which Julian clasped firmly. To new beginnings, then. Upstairs, Isabel slept peacefully for the first time in months, her worn notebook of drawings open beside her bed. On the page, 3 figures stood hand in hand beneath a bright sun, a family reimagined, born not from obligation, but from choice. The courthouse overflowed with Savannah's curious citizens, reporters clutching notepads, and the social elite who had once dined alongside Camilla Langford at country club brunches. Now they watched her sit alone at the defendant's table, her designer outfit unable to mask her isolation. Julian, Worthing, and Thomas sat together on the opposite side, a united front that would have been unimaginable months earlier. When the judge asked if anyone wished to speak before the final ruling, Isabel rose from her seat. The courtroom fell silent. The little girl who had once been too frightened to speak now approached the bench with a folded paper in her hand. Sasha gave her an encouraging nod from the gallery. I wrote this, Isabel said, her voice small but clear in the hushed room. It's called My Real Home. She unfolded her poem with trembling fingers. The judge leaned forward, her expression softening as the child began to read. Home isn't marble floors or crystal chandeliers, Isabel read. It's not where people smile for cameras, but cry when doors close. Home is where your voice matters, where truth isn't something to hide. As she continued, several jurors dabbed at their eyes. Even the court. Reporter paused momentarily, moved by the 9-year-old's words about belonging and safety. Thomas watched his daughter with pride and regret mingled in his expression. While Julian's eyes never left the child, he had leapt into a pool to save. I want to live where love doesn't have to be earned, Isabel concluded, and where nobody gets pushed when nobody's looking. The courtroom remained silent for several heartbeats after she finished. The judge, visibly affected, thanked her before delivering the verdict with unwavering certainty. Camilla's parental rights were terminated, with joint guardianship granted to Thomas and Julian. The court finds clear and convincing evidence of neglect and endangerment, the judge stated. This child deserves the protection and care of those who have demonstrated genuine concern for her welfare. Camilla's face hardened as she heard the additional ruling. She was barred from contact with Isabel and would face separate criminal proceedings for fraud and embezzlement. As officers approached to escort her out, she caught Mrs. Devon's eye in the gallery. The country club president turned away, already whispering to board members about removing Camilla's name from the membership roster. Outside the courthouse, as cameras flashed and reporters called questions, Isabel stood between Thomas and Julian, holding both their hands. Sasha joined them, completing the circle of protection that had formed around the child who had found her voice. It's over, Thomas whispered to his daughter. But in many ways, it was just beginning. The Marigold Foundation garden brunch looked remarkably different this spring. Sunlight dappled through the oak trees, casting gentle shadows across the country club's manicured lawn. Isabel Langford walked confidently across the grass, her yellow sundress a stark contrast to the terror she'd experienced in this very place 1 year ago. No longer the frightened child clinging to the pool's edge, she now moved with purpose, her hand firmly clasped in Sasha's. Ready to say hello to everyone? Sasha asked, giving the girl's hand a gentle squeeze. Isabel nodded, her eyes bright with a confidence that had blossomed over the past months of therapy and healing. I wrote something new for today, she whispered. Across the lawn, Julian Worthing chatted with several club members who once viewed him as an outsider. The Millionaire's reputation had transformed completely. No longer the impulsive disruptor of Savannah's social order, but a respected guardian who had helped expose generations of hidden abuse. Mrs. Devon approached, offering him a flute of champagne. The club's making a donation to the youth center in Isabel's name, she announced, her tone carrying genuine warmth rather than the practiced cordiality of previous years. Thomas, standing nearby, caught his daughter's eye and smiled. His return from Argentina had begun a healing process for both of them. Though the legal battles had been exhausting, the shared guardianship arrangement with Julian had given Isabel the stability she desperately needed. Your poetry class has a waiting list now, Thomas told Isabel as she approached. The center director called this morning. The girl beamed with pride. What had started as therapeutic expression had grown into something more. A weekly class where Isabel taught other children to find their voices through poetry. Many of these children had their own stories of being silenced, their own truths waiting to be told. Later, as afternoon light bathed the gathering, Julian found himself standing beside Sasha near the pool, the very spot where everything had changed. "I never thought I'd be grateful for that day," he admitted quietly. Sasha slipped her hand into his. Their rekindled relationship had surprised them both, growing stronger through their shared commitment to Isabel's well-being. "Some foundations need to crack before they can be rebuilt properly," she replied. Across the lawn, Noel, now a sophomore with an even larger social media following, captured Isabel reading a poem to a circle of attentive children. His drone footage had once exposed a terrible truth. Now it documented a community's transformation. The old savannah, with its rigid hierarchies and buried secrets, hadn't disappeared entirely. But something new had taken root in its place. A commitment to transparency, to protecting the vulnerable, to valuing truth over appearance. As Isabel's clear voice carried across the garden, her words seemed to crystallize the change that had come to this once closed world. A change that began with a scream, a splash, and the courage to speak up.